Right. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Wan. I'm the political director of the YACU, and today we're welcoming you to our third YACU-Con of the year. We restarted our numbering since 2021, so we're doing our third one this year. So today, if you don't know, the YSU's mission is to engage youth in politics and to promote unity and bipartisanship. We have a variety of different volunteer member opportunities. I have not updated this. Communications is Kanika, digital is Johan, organizing is Michael, and political is me. We have lots of different events you can find at events.ysu.org, as well as chapters that you can find at ysu.org/chapters. I didn't change some of this, but we are going to be having a speaker series. Promote will be talking about across the aisle, and volunteer will be talking about volunteering for the YACU. So we'll be starting with engage with our speaker series. A little bit about our speaker today. Dr. Coleman is the chair of political science and international studies and also an associate professor of political science at the University of Tampa. She specializes in East Asian and Japanese politics, and her research interests include family, gender, international organization, and politics of the digital age. We're excited to have you, Dr. Coleman. If anyone has any questions for her, I ask that you hold them until the end or whatever's preferable for you. So I'm aware that you wanted to share your screen, correct?
Yes, if that's all right, I will go ahead and do that then. Oh, hang on. Okay, can you guys see this? All right, fantastic. I'm going to put this on the current slide here. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me to your organization. I love hearing of young people getting involved in politics and people who are political nerds who are just interested in talking about issues and learning more on their own free time. No one's forcing you to do this, but you just are interested in politics to do that. So I think that's wonderful what you're doing to bring people together and enrich the debate and learn things. So I hope to also learn from you guys about what you're interested in and what you find interesting about digital politics, life on the internet these days. And so I hope in the Q&A you'll also share, your interests and questions and passions about these kinds of topics. I framed this as hot topics in digital politics, and I want to start by looking at some major controversies and related to digital politics, just things that are kind of ripped from the headlines over the last few weeks and months. And then also point out that a lot of these controversies that are in the headlines these days, they're actually almost kind of inevitable outgrowths of the way the internet was designed itself. There are certain kind of technological design choices when people created the internet. Scientists and internet engineers first created this network of networks. And the way it's governed has really shaped the controversies that we have. And so I think that raises interesting questions for how it should be governed in the future as well. So I'm going to start out with the controversies, kind of 4 different sets of controversies and topics related to digital politics. And then we'll do a little bit of an overview of how did we get here? How did we get here? How was the internet created in the first place? How is the internet governed? And then we'll end up with some Q&A. So that's kind of the idea behind this talk. So the first hot topic number 1, is, this has definitely been a hot topic over the last few months, is social media content moderation and freedom of speech issues. So, as we all know, it was ripped from the headlines that, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, in January of 2021, after the November election, but before the inauguration of President Biden, he had his Twitter account suspended and he was forced off a social media platform. And that created a huge stir politically, of course, and it raised questions about, some people thought this was an overdue step, that Twitter waited too long, and other people said this was a huge overstep from Twitter, that they shouldn't have done this to the president of the United States, the leader of a major country, especially when they let other leaders of other countries that are also have sometimes made questionable statements and choices or preside over systems of government that do repressive things. They still are on these platforms. Did it violate the First Amendment? No, that usually refers to government stepping on the speech by citizens, but it does raise questions about the private power of technology companies to regulate speech online. And, it really does kind of emphasize the ways that, any user of these services, even if they're as powerful as the United States president, they often have so they may have little recourse to challenge these decisions or share their concerns. There are also concerns about these social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and so forth, and whether they're fair to liberals and conservatives alike. I've heard arguments on both sides, but it goes back to the notion that these private tech companies have an awful lot of power over our lives, even if it's not strictly speaking a First Amendment violation to have online censorship via terms of service of these companies. Nonetheless, they have a lot of sway over our lives, and they could significantly influence political discourse. So this is kind of one major topic area online, is social media content moderation and freedom of speech. A second major hot topic area would be misinformation and polarization. Now, there's a lot of misinformation on the internet, as we all know, on everything from health to politics and beyond. This is an article from January 2020, over a year ago now, from BuzzFeed News, talking about how social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter were being overrun with misinformation about the coronavirus, saying that it was, that there was a hoax being spread by QAnon supporters and anti-vaxxers that Bill Gates had created the coronavirus. And this kind of misinformation is a persistent problem, an endemic problem on the internet. And it's not just a US problem either. We see exactly this kind of misinformation about health and politics almost anywhere the internet touches in the world. It's a major issue. And it's an issue for health issues and vaccine safety and promoting knowledge about the correct scientific knowledge about the coronavirus, but also information about the 2020 election in November. There was a lot of misinformation about that online, and social media companies started taking more active content moderation policies to remove some of that information as well as outcomes related to other kinds of all kinds of information is increasingly under scrutiny of social media companies. And again, it just reinforces that idea that these private technology companies have an awful lot of power over our lives and the kinds of information that we share online and their ability to influence politics. Now, with regard to polarization, polarization is a phenomenon in politics where we refer to how political attitudes kind of split very far left and right. They run to the right and run to the far right and run to the far left. That's polarization. And people have been worried about this problem in politics for a long time. There seems to be a shift of polarization happening in many parts of the world, including the United States, that might be happening even independently of things that are happening in the digital space. And for a long time, we've had traditional media communications companies like talk radio or the television, Fox News or MSNBC, that also may play a role in polarization. But I would point out that a lot of political scientists right now are pointing out that the issue is polarization is an issue, but it's also not perfectly symmetrical. And this might be an interesting issue or point for discussion for especially a group that promotes unity or bipartisanship, that the political information environment isn't perfectly symmetrical these days. And we do see more extreme, political scientists have noted more extremist tendencies on the right than the left. I heard a quip just yesterday that, the far right increasingly in the United States is quite comfortable with the Republican Party as it is today. But if you talk to the far left, they can't stand the Democratic Party. So it's, it just seems like there is a unequal balance between political parties and political ideology these days. And that might be, the internet might be a factor for that, but it's not the only factor by far. And there might be other forces that are equally important or more important in driving that trend. Some studies of polarization done by political scientists have found that on the internet, people do tend to gather and congregate with other like-minded people. But as far as I know, there hasn't been strong, solid, systematic evidence that is pushing people in a more extreme direction. And in fact, some studies have found almost the opposite, that if people who are online actually do engage with people who have other opinions more than they would in so-called real life. A lot of people's friend networks and neighborhoods or other social circles, they actually are more likely to interact with like-minded people than they are on the internet or even on traditional media. So there's something going on with regard to polarization and like-minded people getting involved, but it's actually hard for social scientists to tease out exactly what's going on, especially when there are so many other factors involved related to traditional media or even other political phenomena that could be causal factors. So anyway, this is topic number 2, is misinformation and polarization in digital politics. Topic number 3, hot topic number 3, is cybersecurity and cyber warfare. Now, the information revolution in digital politics is changing the basis of our economy as well as our sources of power in international relations. I've sometimes heard the phrase that data is the new oil, to show that the way that it can become a very valuable product. It also means, because of the internet-enabled communications, it's harder than ever for governments to keep secrets from each other. Oftentimes, these internet-enabled communications allow for greater exploitation by nation-state adversaries or cyber criminals. We've seen a number of times recently that even local governments or hospitals or other critical infrastructure providers are hit by ransomware attacks where people try to get money. The headline refers to this kind of nation-state adversary issue, and we're seeing this is a really serious issue. This is ripped from the headlines just this last week. There was a hacking that was exposed that's attributed to the Russian government, Russian intelligence against U.S. systems. Also, persistent attacks from allegedly Chinese systems, and I would just assume that these kinds of cyber attacks are endemic to modern life these days, modern digital life. I would also assume that the United States does some of this in kind, both to adversaries and allies alike. This particular New York Times story is about whether the United States should retaliate for hacking by this Russian intelligence group. It originally was noticed during the Trump administration, hitting the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the Pentagon, and it was said to be one of the most stunningly large and sophisticated attacks. And the way that it was clever, the way it was done. They went after a company called SolarWinds, and that company was compromised, and they sold a lot of software to the U.S. government, all these different government agencies doing really critical government functions. And then also those agencies downloaded the software and then they got exploited. But also lots of Fortune 500 companies use this exact same SolarWinds software. Now, if this attack was attributed to Russians and Russians got into the networks, what were they doing there? Usually what they're doing is espionage. And on some level, that's what nation states always do to each other. They're always spying on each other. And that's almost considered kind of fair game. But the scope and scale of espionage these days is so much larger because of the digital capabilities to store massive amounts of data and penetrate far more deeply than they ever have before. So it really creates new questions about what is fair play for espionage. That's probably what's going on. It's probably espionage of specific targets. But the greater risk is, what if people find the data and they try to change the data or they try to delete the data? That's the real scary stuff. If they try to delete data or change data, I mean, it's bad. Espionage is bad enough. It can be used in all kinds of compromising ways against people, but it would be very serious and scary if there were other kinds of attacks going on. And then, part of this headline too is retaliation. How do you actually have deterrence? How do you prevent people from doing this to your country? The idea here, I think, is the United States has said, we're going to hack back against Russia. We're going to do it in a secret way at a time of our choosing. And I think it was very similar. The United States had a similar response after the North Korea, it was attributed to hack Sony Pictures a number of years ago. And what that means is also, what's appropriate, what's fair play. A lot of countries are just developing norms about what is fair play and how do you establish deterrence in this area for international relations. And it's still kind of the Wild West. It's still really an area where we're still thinking things through about what is the right kind of response. It's very tricky. So anyway, this is a whole other area of hot topics. And then the final hot topic area is the area of the internet economy and data privacy. So tech companies are now some of the most valuable companies on earth. And it's a booming business to produce any kind of device or machine that connects to the internet. And this is great for the economy worldwide, basically. There's lots of potential gains for labor productivity. There's lots of opportunities for automation, especially with the development of artificial intelligence. I see a comment here is someone chatting in the chat. Just say, let's do something good. Not yet, but it might happen. So the internet economy is big business, and there's lots of new questions about government business relations. for these companies. So, you know, do you tax online sales? Should you share revenues between tech platforms and app stores and the makers of apps? Should you share revenue between social media companies and traditional news companies? Can you tax how should we tax the profits of tech companies in a fair way across different countries? Is all super concentrated in the United States and Silicon Valley, and a lot of other countries want a piece of that profit for their own tax revenue. And so there's lots of new government business relation questions with the internet economy. And then there's also questions about, you know, a lot of us are just users of internet services, whether it be Zoom or whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat or anything else. And for most of these services, we don't pay a dang thing. And there's a slogan, right? If you're not the customer, you're the product. If you're not the customer, you're the product, which is to say, right, if you're not paying for something, someone else is probably very eager in getting the data trail that you're leaving online. You know, through all of our social media histories are elaborately, you know, collected by these tech companies, and then they're, you know, sold to data brokers who in turn sell it to advertising companies so that they can target us more specifically. And so there's an effort in the state of Florida now. Governor DeSantis has proposed a legislation that's being introduced by a new first-year lawmaker from Sarasota who is talking about data privacy legislation, which would allow users to opt out of data collection, force companies to disclose the kinds of data that they're collecting and selling, and also be more responsive. If you ask them to fix something, they should have to respond. And so this is, I guess, designed to be modeled somewhat on the California. That California has a similar data privacy legislation. The European governments through the EU has a GDPR data privacy legislation that is also kind of a model for this in a way. So, you know, some governments are being responsive to this. The United States is a bit of a laggard in this area, but it's a hot topic. Data privacy is a hot topic. So anyway, these are kind of 4 hot topics, but I just kind of want to point out though that like how we got here is both shocking and not shocking all at the same time. I mean, I think it's in some ways the origins of the internet itself really tell a lot of the story of how we got here for these issues being controversial. So for the trying to advance my slide here and I'm not sure what's going on. Oh, here we go. So it kind of goes back to the origins of the internet. So I would point out that the internet we use today is actually a prototype technology. The internet that we're using today is the same internet that was being developed like in the late 60s, and it's basically a 1970s technology that we're still using in the year 2021 right now. That's like 50 years, you know, 50 years of the same technology. It was not designed. The internet we're using today was not designed to be the world's premier telecommunications network. But once it got going, it got going. It just took on a life of its own. It wasn't designed with security features in mind. It was started by a small group of government researchers funded by the US Department of Defense research unit. And there were academic researchers at Stanford and, you know, Berkeley and MIT and other agencies that kind of got this going. But the idea was when the internet started, when computers started connecting to each other with networks and networks started connecting with other networks, it was an era where people literally knew everyone else. Like it was you and your friends and your friends of your friends who were all on the internet together. And anyone who knew the internet protocol, you know, the language for connecting computers, could just set up a device connected to the internet and connect away. And so that meant there wasn't, when they were designing this, when this is a US Defense Department funded project, they never thought or imagined that one day nation state adversaries would literally be connecting their devices to this exact same internet. And so it wasn't really designed with security features in mind, and we're living with some of those consequences, for better or worse. It wasn't designed to be the global town square. I mean, nobody imagined that we would be conducting massive political debates and campaigns and political advertising on these, you know, social media platforms where we're all participating, or that we're all doing internet commerce on, you know, Amazon or other kinds of marketplaces. But we are, you know, it wasn't, people didn't even think there was commercial opportunity at first in the early era of the internet. People didn't see that potential to make money or for it to be a global public commons. But that's kind of an illusion too. It's not exactly a global public commons because it's still mostly run on private networks and private companies. And so that creates a lot of the tensions and dilemmas that we're seeing today. Also, nobody would have ever imagined too that would be connected one day to millions of internet-enabled devices, the so-called Internet of Things, where you can have, you know, internet-enabled, you know, microwave, refrigerator, any kind of appliance in your home, as well as cars or cell phones or other kinds of things. So we've got digital sensors everywhere now. And so now so many things are connected in ways that are probably surpassing anyone's wildest imaginations. Now, that said, people did have some pretty wild imaginations in the late 1960s. So one of the earliest thinkers about the internet, the idea for an intergalactic network, was this guy, J.C.R. Licklider, who had this idea for accessing information anywhere via global computer network. And he was the head of the Defense Department's Advanced Research Project Agency, to try to kind of say, hey, let's try this. You know, this is not, doesn't need to be science fiction. We can actually try to develop communications networks through some kind of system. And people were inspired by this vision, and they kept working at it. And the so-called, one of the so-called fathers of the internet is this guy Vint Cerf. He's here featured in his trademark three-piece suit wherever he goes. He was a program manager at DARPA for the internet, and he helped bring about that vision of Licklider to create a communications network that would be widespread. And he created the Internet Protocol System, IP, TCP/IP, with Bob Kahn. And it was just these two guys who did it, and part of, again, a small circle of researchers that were mostly in the United States, but not exclusively in the United States. It was transnational from the beginning. So it was not, even though it was funded by the US government, it was designed from the beginning to be kind of basically open. That was the idea. It was going to be open. It was going to be non-proprietary. People weren't going to try to make money off it. No IP product or service. You know, if you make any kind of device, you've got an internet-enabled tea kettle or something like that, you don't need a special patent for that. You know, you don't need it. You can't get patents for just making something internet-enabled. It's all royalty-free. So it was designed from the beginning to be kind of broad open for anyone to just connect anything to this, and to be really kind of open at the ends to allow more and more people. That's the benefit of a network, is it scales, and you reap more benefits by having more people connected and devices connected. There's an organization called the Internet Engineering Task Force that are mostly like computer network engineers, and that helped develop subsequent modifications to the internet protocol and companion protocols. And one of the things that's interesting about the way the internet's governed from a technological side is that it's also totally open forum. They meet in person, you know, in pre-pandemic times, the before times, they'd meet like 4 times a year in different locations around the world. And if you met in person, there would be a fee to get into the conference, but they have like open email listservs, and you can be literally anyone on this call right now could, you know, join an email listserv and help be part of the conversation that shapes the internet protocols that run the internet itself. It's really remarkably open, and they work to keep those technologies open and non-proprietary. So again, the design of the internet was one where it was a transnational network of government and academic researchers. It was open and non-proprietary. It was inherently designed to be decentralized. That was a really different model than other telecommunications companies in the past, like telephones or telegraphs, that were more point-to-point systems. It runs mostly on private telecommunications networks. And it's unlike previous telecommunications industries too. It's not governed by nation states via an intergovernmental organization. One of the earliest telecommunications technologies was, you know, the telegraph, and there is the original ITU was the International Telegraph Union. The Postal Service, there's a Universal Postal Union. There are various intergovernmental organizations to govern various telecommunications and other kinds of communications technologies. But this is one where it's not really governed by nation states in the way that previous technologies have. Instead, again, if you're you know, on campus and you're talking to a friend, you know, your data is being routed via internet service providers that are all connected via interconnection agreements called peering arrangements. And you know, your data just, you know, goes, you know, freely from one to another in a decentralized way, in a way that it's to try to. And if one path gets cut off, it'll go a different route. And it, you know, but the bottom line here is it's mostly private companies that are operating this network. So you've got a lot of interesting things going on here. And it means even critical government services, though, are being operated over private networks. Even defense communications are operating over private networks. And this creates a lot of problems and issues. Now, the Internet Society is kind of the public policy wing of the IETF, and they have this vision for what the internet should be. They want to stay close to the internet's origins. They say that's what was great about the internet compared to the telephone or the telegraph or the radio. I mean, what's great about the internet is that it was open from the beginning, open standards. It's about open communications. anyone can join, anyone can speak on the internet, open economies, open standards, frictionless borders, and then open governance institutions like the IETF where anyone can participate. And so they would say this is what they would love to have the internet kind of stay close to this vision. But I think the internet, because of the hot topics that are arising, it puts pressure on all of these different kinds of circles in this larger virtuous circle. Who governs the internet? There are a lot of different governors of the internet. There's, again, like the IETF or other standards bodies like ICANN that controls like domain name, like internet names and numbers. There's internet service providers that give you that last mile of access to the internet, like Comcast or Verizon. Social media companies, through their terms of service, are kind of global governors of the internet. And then governments do regulate all the above actors, but it's a difficult thing. They're late to the party. Governments are late to the party here. You have a lot of private actors in this space. And so, this is kind of where our hot topics come from. We're working on the global communications network. It was never designed to be this large, have the whole world connected. It wasn't, it wasn't designed with these kinds of security features, but we're all using it for, our most critical daily functions for our life and for critical government operations. So I just want to open it up to you guys for questions now too. What kind of hot topics in digital politics most interest you today? Are there areas where you would like to see the government take a bigger role in regulating the internet or digital life? And are there areas where you'd like to see less regulation? Are there areas on the internet or digital life where you'd like to see things that were different? Would you like to see change in certain areas? Do you think we need more national borders on the internet for security of trade and commerce, or to protect us from cyber criminals or nation state adversaries? Or should the internet be more like a series of walled gardens for each country? Or, the opposite view would be the internet founders vision, kind of the internet society vision of the open virtuous circle. Is that still relevant? Is it still attainable when we have other kinds of, issues and controversies arising? So I saw another comment here, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll open it up for, questions from you guys and comments.
All right, cool. As Carlos mentioned in the chat, if you wish to speak, raise your hand within Zoom and we will let you unmute.
Hey, Dr. Coleman. So I do have a question, since this topic really does hit personal. As someone who helps manage multiple large communities in his spare time, I do notice that some of them tend to be a hotbed of radicalization and hate. Despite our efforts, it seems like a losing battle sometimes. Do you feel like there's a way for us volunteer moderators to better improve the safety of our community while also balancing freedom of speech?
That's a really good question. That's a really tough question. I don't know if I have any good answer for that, to be honest. I think we're all kind of groping for a solution in that area. I was, when I've been reading about polarization on the internet and different studies that have been done, even, it's one thing to be a volunteer, but even people who are professional moderators have a dickens of a problem, moderating for content and trying to get extremism off there. And personally, I do think it's good to get extremism off, because it does lead people into corners that they would never otherwise explore, that can be really dangerous, or get them involved in radicalization, and spreading actual hatred is if you deplatforming kind of works, it does. But the question is, even for professional companies like news media companies, the issue is that they can try and do things, but there are always ways to get around moderation. Like, people can alter their profiles to have messages. They can alter the photos associated with their profiles to have messages that are forbidden. They can use kind of so-called gray, things that are kind of not black and white. There's kind of gray areas where they can still get extremist ideas in. And it's really hard. And, if you look to the example of the ways people have tried, the Chinese government has tried censorship, for example, Chinese internet users are incredibly creative, in freewheeling, humorous ways sometimes, and sometimes that's to challenge the government in ways that people might find, interesting or helpful or something like that. But I think it just goes to the point that humans have a lot of ingenuity in how they want to get their ideas across, and it makes it very challenging for anyone to moderate. I don't have any magic solution, unfortunately, for volunteer content moderators, because I noticed that the professionals who have a lot more time and have somebody literally paid to sit down and do that, they have a hard time too. So I think it's just, I don't know how to teach people to behave or be polite or things like that, but just, encouraging people to be civil, I think, and practicing dialogue across different viewpoints, and just, realizing that this, life goes on. Politics is important, but, even if things don't go your way in politics sometime too, life goes on. Nothing is worth, spreading hatred over, or extremist viewpoints for violence or inciting violence or anything like that. It's not worth it.
All right. Out of respect for Dr. Coleman's time, we'll take just one more question, and then we'll move on to the wrapping up stuff after the speaker. So if there's one more question, please raise your hand. Harvey.
Hi. I had a question about when you talked about private institutions online, especially in the providing services, mainly communication. A lot of other things like Amazon when it comes to shopping services. Do you think there are dangers to having so many private institutions provide these services rather than maybe a government institution providing them?
Are there dangers to private institutions providing these services instead of a government agency? Not necessarily, but I think governments play a role. That governments can regulate these things. So I think there's. But it's when companies become very powerful, then it can be hard to regulate them too. So I don't think the sheer fact that they're private isn't necessarily an issue or necessarily a problem. There probably the same kinds of issues would happen even if they were fully government owned and operated platforms. Some things are just kind of inherent to the medium of communication. So I don't personally see a huge distinction between public or private. But on the other hand, that's not to say that it's possible that there could be room for more creative thinking for what public provision of certain kinds of platforms might look like. I'm not sure what that would look like, but I think it's worth exploring different ideas because competition is healthy, and maybe even some of these private entities can use more competition.
All right, great. So thank you, Dr. Coleman. That concludes the speaker part of our YACU-Con. If anyone else has any questions that went unanswered, Dr. Coleman, if you want to drop an email or something like that in the chat so that people can contact you. Otherwise, we will get back to the slideshow. All right. Okay, so there you go, make it big. Following that, our promote section for today, as following our engage, promote, volunteer. Promote, we're going to be talking about across the aisle. It's our new channel. It's not newest, but it's still relatively new from the past month or so. In our Discord server, where we are posting social media content or news coverage on unity, bipartisanship, nonpartisan political engagement, that kind of stuff. And our communications director, Kanika, has been making across the aisle recaps sometimes. And you can find those at ysu.org/unet. And the symbolism is reaching across the aisle in terms of the political in Congress or something like that. And the last thing that we'll talk about with volunteer is that we encourage all of you, especially if you're new and you're not currently on a volunteer team, to join a volunteer team. We have 4 different volunteer teams that you can join. If each of the directors would like to say a brief thing on what you guys do, we'll start off with comms. You're muted, Kanika. Oh, someone give her co-host permissions.
Hey guys, so as far as volunteering for the comms team, we are currently looking for members to join our press team, which works on press outreach and trying to get the YASU's name out there as far as articles or any kind of coverage. We are also still accepting applicants to write for UNET and to work on the podcast. I have to find it, but I will drop a couple links here, or a link here, for you to join, but we'd love to have you.
All right, and then Johan unfortunately couldn't make it, but our digital team helps produce social media graphics, edits videos, manages our social media accounts, and helps market and publicize our organization's events through social mediums. Michael, if you want to talk on organizing.
So organizing is going through some changes this month, but after those changes, we should be mainly working on chapter stuff as well as running some events.
All right, and for political, we have two main sides of political. One is outreach, where we connect and find speakers like Dr. Coleman, as well as find other organizations and politicians that we can connect with, expanding our outreach, as well as our political education subdivision that helps create content alongside the Unity Network to educate people from a nonpartisan perspective on policy issues, and learning about policy through that way as well. So that concludes our YACU-Con. If you enjoyed this YACU-Con, I strongly encourage you to join our Discord server at discord.yacu.org so that you can get the latest information on our next YACU-Con, as well as other events. You can also check events.yacu.org if you don't want to join Discord but still want to know about our events. If you're watching this recording at a later date, I strongly encourage you to you can reach out to Dr. Coleman if you have any questions about her talk at, you can find her email at lcoleman@ut.edu. And thank you for watching. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching our latest YACU-Con video. If you like what you saw, be sure to share with your friends, click one of the videos that's on screen now, or visit us at yacu.org/join for information on how you can get involved or participate in events like this in the future.